This is definitely the IPO of Alibaba. That's amazing. The company managed to attract from the market $25 billion. And this is a new world record. And Ukraine is also rich with IT professionals. For example, if we take top 5 IT companies of Ukraine, they employ almost 15,000 of IT specialists. But does any one of you remember when was the last time, when was the IPO of a Ukrainian company? I don't remember. Let me introduce Dmytro Anufriev, the partner and the head of corporate finance practice of Deloitte Ukraine, who will moderate the panel and introduce all the speakers. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dmytro Anufriev. We have the last panel in this event, which is called Equity Investments, Comebacks and Transformation. And I'd like to thank the organizers for the honor to moderate this panel. And I'd like to introduce our reputable audience, our panel participants. It is Attila, Koksal, whom you have already met today. Who is not only a member of the board of the CFA Institute, but also partner at Unlu Securities. Konstantin Magaletskyi. Hello. Konstantin Magaletskyi, who is a partner in Horizon Capital, private equity investment, private equity manager. Then Mycyk, who is a partner at Dentons, legal firm. Brian Best, head of investment banking department with Dragon Capital, an independent investment bank, and Slava Rabinovich, CEO and CIO of Dmytro Capital Advisors. We will have approximately 1 hour net for our discussion, and we will reserve 15 minutes for questions to the audience. We will talk about various types of investments, how to attract, how much, where, and whether at all it is all viable and possible. The topic of our conference today, as you know, is evolution after revolution, and the key point during the last couple of months for our country is the transition. And as you know, our ambition as a country to join the European Union requires a lot of investments. Based on various estimates, it's around $200 billion of investments which are required. So, key question is whether we as a country and Ukrainian companies are basically able to raise that and through which options. So I would like to start our discussion with really where we are in terms of fundraising capacities, in terms of ability to raise that much equity. And I'd like to ask my first question to Brian. Brian, you, during the last 8 years, your company, Dragon Capital, has completed over 100 deals, if I'm not mistaken, having raised $3.4 billion. So I think you are experienced in raising money for Ukrainian companies, right? So how would you comment the fundraising capacities of Ukraine? And what are the options currently available to Ukrainian companies in terms of raising equity? And by the way, I'd like to propose that we have one prohibited answer. And that would sound no because of the war, or no because of the war. So this is not only because I like
yes, because of the war, right?
It's not only because I'd like all of us to be a little bit more positive and constructive. We of course want to hear the truth, not fairy tales. But another angle to that is that we would like to talk about the perspective of not only today, but today as well as the next couple of years. So let's just take a little bit longer horizon when we will discuss things, and when doing that, I hope we will have a little bit more flexibility in terms of interactive options to raise equity. So Brian, would you like to start?
Well, you already told everybody what the answer I was going to give. I have to come up with something else now. Yeah, it's certainly an extremely difficult time to raise any kind of capital for Ukraine, not just equity, but also debt, as we heard from the panel before. Debt capital market is dead. The equity capital market right now is also extremely tight and very difficult. You know, I look though how I was talking with a couple of my colleagues a little bit earlier, and I said, well, I'm going to be optimistic, not like the last time, which was, you know, I thought I was going to go and blow my brains out in the bathroom between sessions because I was so depressed about the way people were looking at the situation here in Ukraine. So I'm going to do my best to be as positive as I possibly can. I came to Ukraine in early 1998, and so I feel like I've been through this now many times. And even before Ukraine, I spent 3 years living in Bulgaria, and I was fortunate enough, or unfortunate enough, to have raised a fund, a small privatization fund in Bulgaria in 1995, $25 million. And then we had I guess they called it the Rose Revolution in Bulgaria, and we basically gave all the money back. And I left and went to graduate school, and then came to Ukraine right after graduate school in 1998. So when I came to Ukraine, we had obviously a few months to get acclimated, and then we had the Russian financial crisis. And we had just raised $60 million, which at that time for Ukraine was actually a lot of money for private equity deals. And you know, I was working for Signal Blazer, and I went to Michael Blazer and I said, look, Michael, I mean, you just hired me, I understand, and you know, now we have the Russian financial crisis, maybe it's time, you know, I just pack my bags since I'm fresh, I can leave, I don't speak the language yet. And he said, Ron, are you crazy? He's like, this is going to be the best buying experience you've probably ever seen in your life. He's like, stick around for a couple of years, it's going to be fun. And I thought, well, this guy is either really smart or really crazy. But I decided I had nothing better to do, so I stuck around. And in 1999, we started buying all the cable television networks that we could get our hands on. I see Valery Salyamov in the room, who was part of the team when we were buying those cable television assets. And I can tell you that when we started talking to these companies, and I asked them, I said, well, how much does it cost you to build one subscriber? And they said, well, about $18. And then I did the math, and I was like, well, wait a second, we're buying the whole company. If you calculate the number of subscribers, we're paying like $15 per subscriber. So, okay, let's start buying. And so we started buying all the cable television networks and then merged them together. And I can tell you that what you guys all probably know, that Signal Blazer sold I think 40 or 50% of that business and made a really nice profit, I mean, an astronomical profit for this country in that particular deal. And you know, of course, after that, we had the crisis in 2004. And I remember I had already left Signal Blazer, and I had set up my own corporate finance business. And then I got invited to Renaissance Capital's investor conference. I think it was in early 2005. And I couldn't believe how many portfolio investors were in the room. And there was probably like 400, 500 portfolio investors at the conference. And so I decided that was the time, you know, to find a brokerage business. And then I joined Dragon Capital, helped Tomasz set up the corporate finance business for Dragon Capital, and then we had the crisis in 2008, and I thought, here we go again, you know, another crisis. And you know, after 2008, 2009 was one of our best years we had at Dragon Capital. And and then here we are again. And so, forgive me if I'm not as pessimistic as everybody else. My stomach is growling because I'm looking forward to next year. I actually think that we are going to have another chance again to invest and to make money in this difficult but very very opportunistic country. Now, naturally, I don't think that time is now. Obviously, we have a very difficult situation economically in the country. We have a very difficult situation politically in the country. But what I am seeing from investors is that there needs to be a few positive steps. There's a huge amount of investment capital sitting in Europe and in the US that would like to come to Ukraine and help, would like to come and rebuild Ukraine. But the new government has to start showing some positive steps. And once it does, once we start seeing that trend that we're all expecting and hoping to see, I think that investment capital is going to come. And it will come in the form of debt, it'll come in the form of equity, and we'll start to see that trend that we've seen over and over again, we'll start to see it happen. It may look differently overall, but it will happen. I'm confident in that.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically, what you are saying is that various forms will be available, both debt as well as equity capital, once the new government shows positive steps and the situation stabilizes, right? So basically, it's short conclusion.
Sure. And I think you're starting to see some capital coming to the market now. M&A, strategic investors are looking at opportunities. And then, of course, your distressed investors are looking for opportunities. I mean, those aren't the types of long-term investors that we want to see, but they play a role, and that's capital coming to Ukraine.
Okay, sure. So thank you, Brian. I'd like to ask a question to Slava. Slava, you manage, you're a founder and a manager of a fund which has over $200 million of investments, all in capital markets. What do you think about the potential of growth of the Ukrainian stock market? Are there any, not today, not tomorrow, but during the short to medium term and especially long term, do you see a potential for growth here, and will it be a meaningful instrument to raise equity for Ukrainian companies?
Well, thank you for the question. I carefully listened to Brian, and I disagree with him on many points. There's no sense in discussing what I agree with, because that's about 75%. I disagree about 25%. I have been an investor in Ukraine since longer than you, Brian, since 1996. When I first started at the Hermitage Fund with Bill Browder. I've been investing via my own venture, Diamond Age funds in Ukraine for 10 years when I launched in 2004. My track record in terms of investments in Ukraine is very mixed. In some investments I made a lot of money, I lost some money in others, but Ukraine doesn't have a very good track record in my book. And not because I'm not a good manager, but because Ukraine hasn't been producing a very good track record. Track record of Ukraine is actually 2 revolutions within a span of 10 years. And if the second revolution is going to be a failure, then Ukraine will not have any investment track record at all. It's going to have a track record of revolutions, 3rd revolution, 4th revolution. There is a way for Ukraine to make every single private business owner wealthier by approximately 30% overnight without doing anything. In fact, if you own a business and your operations and your profits and your profit margins are such that they are today, tomorrow we know that nothing will be changed because it's only 24 hours. But every single business owner can be 30% wealthier only because of the restart of capital markets in Ukraine, because there is a premium and discount of the existence or non-existence of capital markets and the stock market of approximately 30% just by the mere fact of it. Now, some of you know that I'm trying to raise some money for a new fund which is codenamed Ukraine Recovery Fund and so on. Obviously, nobody will give me any money to the fund structure with 220 fee structure for me to invest in 3 blue chips in Ukraine. That's going to be a very stupid and of investors to give me the money on these terms, and will be very, very dishonest for me to try to raise money and to invest into 3 stocks. So therefore, the fund by design will need to be a sort of a mixture between private equity at this point, mixture between private equity and probably some special situations where special situations are defined as bad assets, some distressed situations, distressed debt, which is not necessarily will remain as distressed debt, but may be converted into equity, and good management of that. For this, I need 3 things. I need a visibility of the investment horizon. I need a visibility of exit strategy, and the exit strategy obviously is not necessarily a sale at a much higher value to another strategic investor, but also a possibility of coming out to capital markets by IPO. And I need a clear visibility on the risk-reward ratio. And my crystal ball is very fogged up at the moment. And it's extremely difficult to raise money for 2 reasons. The first reason is because potential investors, potential clients of mine have this fogged up view. The second is that the manager, myself, I have a fogged up view. And there is a clear set of a sequence that needs to be done in order to start up capital markets again. The first one is the law, illustration law. Is it the same in English, illustration? The law, illustration law, as it is drafted and implemented right now, is not good. Based on various Ukrainian communication with EU and other international lawyers and so on, the law does not include in itself illustration of elected officials. That means that any mayor of any city or any region can be elected, and it doesn't matter who he was in the past. That doesn't work, but the European Union thinks that it should work because they think that the free and honest elections will be a filter that will work as a quasi-illustration. It's not going to work here. It's like saying that in West Germany after World War II, a former SS officer could be elected a mayor of Munich, for example. So this law is not good. If this law is not good, the second thing is that the entire legal system cannot be made independent, honest, and so on. So the legal reform is actually not possible in its entirety. Without legal reform, there is a complete failure in enforcement of property rights. And if the enforcement of property rights in Ukraine should be either based on Anglo-Saxon model, or if Ukraine doesn't like Anglo-Saxon model, then you don't need to go anywhere far. Just go to Poland and copy the Polish model. If there is no enforcement of property rights, Ukraine cannot create all the necessary steps for a very fast and very speedy development of the small and medium-sized companies, privately owned companies, which will be the integral part not only of the Ukrainian economy, but also over the next 5 to 10 years, the pipeline of real success stories which will come out into the stock market, but before that, private equity deals. If you don't have that, then the entire Ukrainian economy cannot exist. So, starting from the illustration law, going to the legal reform, going into enforcement of property rights, then restarting capital markets. That's the model that I want to see. Now, the unique situation of Ukraine at the moment is that the people of Ukraine produced Maidan. Maidan produced a revolution, and a revolution on behalf of Maidan and Ukrainian people gave a mandate to both branches of the government, which is a unique kind of act of nation building, where the president is elected, the government is formed. On the 26th of October, there were elections into the parliament. So both branches of government are there with a clear mandate, and the mandate is not going to be there forever. In my estimate, the mandate will last for about 500 days. If there are no clear developments along these lines, there will be no further mandate, but Ukraine will go back to a third Maidan. And it's not that Gaidar or Yavlinsky or anybody else back in the early 90s in Russia came up with 500 days out of the blue sky. 500 days is the maximum tolerance level of the population, and if somebody can show me a clear program which is not only declarative in nature, but also has backing of all branches of government, it is very professional, and there is a team of people who are going to implement this program, then I will have a clear visibility. If you have a program, please show it to me, but I don't know. I don't think that it actually exists.
Yes, thank you, Slava, very much. So let's assume we do have this proper illustration law, great deal of the government. We do have the changes which you have enumerated, and specifically we have guaranteed private property. We have fair, independent courts. We have, you know, what you mentioned, small, medium enterprises, etc., developing. So in that, assuming all this happens, then do you see a strong potential for growth in the short to medium term for the Ukrainian stock market, which was the original question?
Absolutely. And if we go back to my experience of the Hermitage Fund, and maybe many of you know, about Sergei Magnitsky and all this situation, it is based on a very simple mathematical and economic example. In 1996 and 97, Hermitage Fund started buying shares of Gazprom. We accumulated 1% of Gazprom in the Hermitage Fund and about 1% of Gazprom outside the Hermitage Fund, but managed by Hermitage Capital. Shares were bought anywhere between $5 and 20 cents. At the time of conversion of so-called gray structures of local shares into international shares, all these so-called local shares have to be sold and repurchased into a international vehicle because the law was changed and now all local shares could be made foreign owned. Why I'm giving this example is if you have an appreciation of Gazprom from 5, 10, 20 cents to $12, you have a position that is capital gain in almost all of its entirety. It doesn't really matter what the cost was, almost doesn't matter because the cost was so small. So the entire size of the position is just pure capital gain. And you have to pay, because these were local shares, a local capital gain tax, which was paid by Hermitage and then stolen by the Russian tax officials and other criminals. This tax was about $230 million. Why I'm giving this example is because Hermitage was not buying it for 10% gain, or 20% gain, or 30% gain. It was buying for 60 times the money and for 100 times the money. 20 cents to $12, or 10 cents to $12. And therefore, at the early stages of a restart of capital markets in Ukraine, you're not going to have portfolio investors who are UK pension funds coming here to make 12% per annum. You're not going to have US university endowments of those bits of money that they invest into stock markets around the world, although they might come from private equity. You're going to have high risk, high return investors that will come here for 20 times the money, 100 times the money, and you don't have to be greedy. Let them make the money because they're going to come. So these are the type of investors, like it was back in the 90s with Gazprom. If you tell me that it was obvious to buy Gazprom at 5 cents a share, that was not obvious. Especially after the 98 crisis, when in 99, Gazprom continued to be worth tens of millions of dollars, like it was like a complete chain of restaurants, but not the largest gas company in the world. I'm just saying that the revaluation is what the investors will be coming for at that stage.
Thank you, Slava. My next question is to Konstantin Magaletskyi. Konstantin, your team at Horizon Capital has been investing in Ukraine since 1995, which is almost 20 years next year, and you have 3 funds. Many people know you are one of the most active investors, private equity investors for sure, in this country. So, what do you think? Is Ukraine now an interesting destination for private equity investors and specifically private equity investors with foreign capital?
Good question. First of all, I believe that we are probably, not only one of the most active, but also one of the oldest investors for sure in this country. And usually our experience was quite positive, and I would agree with many things which Brian said before. I also would like to stress that there is some difference between investors who are sitting, let's say, in Moscow or London and investing into this market, and core-based like Horizon and Dragon private equity fund in Ukraine. So from this perspective, I believe that there is a potential. We still have in our pipeline like 1-2 deals which we would like to do in the observable future. So I think it's also a sign. Then we will probably take a pause and let's see how it will be further. But I agree with also an example of some attractiveness of the market. Talking about other funds, we do know actually that like even this month we expected one of the deals to be closed in Ukraine in, let's say, crisis-resistant sectors. And we believe that there are such crisis-resistant sectors in Ukraine, and we do expect deals to take there even in the current environment. For example, if you look at the IT sector, it wasn't like primarily outsourcing, right? Product development, which is a small still. promising. These sectors are performing quite well in Ukraine. I mean, you know, we have like all sorts of company in our portfolio, so we are speaking from experience. And we do know that there is an interest in now, because they're not hungry for money. They don't have much debt, they're profitable and so on. So even if there is an interest, it doesn't mean that there will be deals, because not all companies are interested in selling, even in such a environment like now. Also, if you look at the culture, from what I hear from the market and from what I see based on my experience as investment professional, there are also some deals which are taking place. Some are distressed, some are not distressed, some are when the banks have some assets and have to sell relatively cheaply, and strategics are buying, like Western strategics. So that's another example of crisis-resistant market. There is also pharma. You know, we are an investor in pharma, and we are following this market very closely. If you look at the performance of Ukrainian pharmaceutical producers, for example, we are same as Rabinovich, we are shareholders in such company. They're actually doing quite well, and some of them are growing. EBITDA is growing even in dollar terms, even in the current amount. So there will be deals. There will be definitely less deals. There will be probably some pause, I would say. And people, both local investors and global, will be looking like where the market is moving, but it also depends on specific case each time, because there are some companies which might be sold now cheaper than usual, and that would attract investors. So it's also a timing issue.
Sure, thank you, Konstantin. I have a question to Attila. You advised a number of clients in your country, in Turkey, who were exploring opportunities to invest in Ukraine some years ago. By some reasons, these deals did not happen. What do you think would be most important for foreign investors, for foreign strategic investors? What are they looking at, and what could be a problem?
Well, let's look at both sides, both strategic and private equity, because I mean, Turkey has attracted a lot of foreign investment in recent years, like starting from 2003, 2004 onwards. And this morning I told in my speech that it was basically the EU accession story that triggered it. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, because we've done many things. Like we changed our legal system, laws, made some improvements, but we haven't done everything right. So I can't tell that Turkey is like an optimum country for investment. But unlike Ukraine, you know, we have a big demographic advantage. And I don't hear this. I mean, today I really didn't hear much talk about demography, because people complain about political issues, economical issues, but
demographics and drivers for that.
Demographics are probably the biggest attraction for funds, because in Turkey, I mean, let's see where foreign investors invested in Turkey. They invested into retail, food retail, diaper businesses, schools, real estate, financial services, banking. Why? Because 50% of the Turkish population is under the age of 50. And we are still growing fast. And our Prime Minister, almost every month, in one of his speeches, he says, make 3 children. So he's creating a lot of pressure on us. He says, make 3 children.
My drivers for the moment.
Okay. So that's one of the reasons Turkey attracts these foreign investments. Not because we have the best legal system, but our legal system, our capital markets, our stock market are, again, I should say, are very advanced than in Ukraine. Because if you want to pull foreign investments in bulk, you have to get this straight. Not always straight, and nobody expects you to become like Germany, but at least make some efforts so that foreign investors feel comfortable when they might make partnerships here. Because private equity funds, they'll come here and they'll sign these long share purchase agreements, shareholders agreements, with a lot of, there's Denton here, so I mean, it's not up to me to talk about these legalese, but I mean, there's so much in it. Options, put options, call options, ratchets, tag alongs, so if they don't trust your legal system. How can they come here? How do you expect them to come here and invest comfortably? And also, they are looking for currency stability, interest rate stability. And currently there is a lot of money, a lot of private equity money, chasing transactions all over the world. And unfortunately, Ukraine is missing this big wave. Because only in Turkey, there are $1 billion dedicated funds to Turkey. And there are many more, between 100 million to maybe $500 million. So probably some $5–6 billion worth of private equity chasing deals in Turkey. And we don't have that many companies. So we don't have it. I mean, there's probably the room for 1 or 2 billion. So in Turkey.
Let's invest in Ukraine.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. There is money out there, but to get that money in, because my company was established in 1996. For 10 years when we first started, nobody was looking at Turkey. So we were going out, we were going to London, we were going to UK, we were going to Germany, we were talking about Turkey, trying to introduce Turkish companies, trying to find buyers. And I remember they would just greet us downstairs and say, okay, you have 5 minutes, shoot. So then you would have to, okay, Turkey is situated between 2 continents and it's geographically very well located. But, I mean, we didn't have a chance. But over time, again, with this European Union and some of the things that we've done right. And again, I'm saying we haven't done everything right. I'm not saying Turkey is really at the top of the, it's not. But some of it, I hope this government can, start making some steps towards it. And really, institutional investors, markets are interesting creatures. So they reward you at times, maybe with a lag, but sometimes they reward you big time. And sometimes they reward you, they penalize you big time. So all you have to do is do your best and expect that the wave will come towards you.
Thank you, Attila, very much. My next question is for Adam. Adam, you are in Ukraine for 20 years, and Dentons is in Ukraine approximately 20 years, advising various clients on deals. And we have talked a lot already during today and beyond about legal system, judicial system, and the problems with legal environment and the impediments related to that to invest in Ukrainian companies. What do you think about the trend? Do you see any positive changes in terms of legal environment and judicial system during the last 9 months or a bit longer period of time? Do you see anything changing in that respect?
Well, it's a tough question, but it's somewhat easy answer. Not much. I think, looking back over the 20 years that I've been here, it's certainly become a much more understandable kind of environment, and I think understandable in terms of being able to explain it better to clients. But, I think a lot of lawyers still sit around, very, very often, kind of scratching their heads and trying to make some sense of what's really behind the law and where you're going to go on certain things. You run across this very often on M&A deals, particularly, when you're doing due diligence and running just across so many problematic issues within companies. You're trying to advise your clients, how to really mitigate, a particular risk, or if it's at all, possible to mitigate those risks. So with so many gaps in the law, sometimes it's very difficult, to provide.
But are these gaps being eliminated now, or is there a process?
Not so much. I think there have been steps. Yeah? So we have, for example, in the last few years, pretty comprehensive law on joint stock companies that really have before, right? Which solved some things, but opened up a lot of other issues. Yeah? But it's been slow. The progress in terms of really kind of reforming, not just on the legislative side, right, because that's kind of one key side of it, but the judicial side as well, which I think is even a more unpredictable, part of the equation, right? I mean, there are lots of, Ukraine's been, I think, advised forever on different types of reforms that need to be made, in almost every single sector and almost every single area of the law, yeah. And we recently participated, there's an organization called the U.S. Ukraine Business Council, which, put together a white paper, so-called white paper for legal reforms in Ukraine. And, interestingly, and this was worked on by sort of 10 different law firms who are all members of this organization. And the kind of main thesis of this paper was that, there's this big myth that's talked about very often, even by the government itself, that says, Ukraine has great laws, but what it really just needs is better enforcement. Yeah? And I think that the main thesis of this paper was, just dump everything, yeah, and start from scratch because there's nothing worth keeping, in the existing legal system. Yeah? And so the paper goes through and covers lots of different areas, and suggests reforms of particular things that need to be made kind of on a quick basis, right? As a first step. But it's the general view of the paper is that there's just nothing worth keeping, right? But and again, the myth, the good law part, even if we get there, yeah, which isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but there are certain things that can be done quickly. I mean, even if you do get there, then you get to the issue with the enforcement and with the judicial system. And there's all this talk about reforming the judiciary, and steps are being made, laws are being implemented. But I think the biggest criticism of this is that a lot of the laws, a lot of the steps that are being sort of implemented are more focused on the technicalities of the judicial process, or just the actual solving of a case, yeah, if you will. To try and make those more transparent, but not necessarily getting to the root of the problem, which is the judges themselves, yeah, who are so deeply entrenched in this system of kind of corruption and favoritism and not at all commercially reasonable legal interpretation, yeah, of what they're supposed to be doing, not ensuring justice, not ensuring fairness, but just sort of being influenced by whoever is able to get to them first, yeah. Which, I mean, that casts everything in doubt. So I mean, until you really have that, I mean, and we have, for example, Slava, who has, this committee, the registration, yeah, who basically just says, look, it really needs a top to bottom, house. So until that happens, I mean, you could have everybody could write the greatest laws, but it's still not.
Of course, yeah, enforceability of laws is even more important than the laws themselves. Yes, we talked about that already today, and we talked a lot about other macro factors which would increase the investment attractiveness of the country and help the country succeed. We talked about various reforms which are necessary. Why don't we spend a couple of minutes on talking about micro level as opposed to macro level? So the level which can be really impacted by people working at real companies rather than people working in the government. So something which can be improved by people in this audience in the right. So micro level, company level. For example, in my practice, we have been doing our job in transaction support, for example, since 2005, and in overall, I have spent 13 years in Deloitte. From my perspective, in terms of micro level, this is just my input to that discussion, is that I would highlight two factors as being most important, and those which were a problem in majority of our deals, and that would be what we call special business practices, which means non-transparent business practices, including various tax optimization schemes, first point, and second point would be value expectation gap. So drastic differences between value expectations between sellers and buyers, if we talk about M&A market. So in terms of other company level, micro level impediments to investments in Ukrainian equity in Ukrainian companies, what is, Brian, what do you think would be, from your perspective, really key micro level factors which impede transactions and which need to be, somehow resolved?
I think the biggest frustration that we've had with deals that we've brought to the market have been, what happens after the company has raised money. They don't have an understanding, as much as you try and work with them to explain that there has to be continuous communication with investors. People have put money in the business, they put faith in management to deliver a certain result, and they want to know how progress is being made, what factors are affecting the business, and that requires a consistent dialogue with investors. And this is why investment banks have research departments that put out research to communicate with investors what's happening within the companies. But those research departments are only as good as the information that they can draw out of the companies. And for us, it's always been a constant battle, it seems, to educate Ukrainian management that there's life after the fundraise, that you have to continue to deliver information, both good and bad, to investors, so they can make decisions and we can keep an active market moving. That has rarely happened, unfortunately, in this country. Even with some of the bigger names, you see it, and they have developed very good investor relations departments. But that mid-tier and even the smaller tier companies, and especially those companies that became public by way of privatization, there's no communication at all. It's extremely difficult at times.
So basically, once the money gets in, job is done, we don't need to do anything else, right? Keep rolling.
And that leaves a bad taste in investors' mouths, right? Because they have made an investment and they need to follow up, and they need to stay on top of those investments that they've made. When the company doesn't reciprocate with information, it's harder for them to make that next investment.
Sure. Thank you. Konstantin, what do you think about that? You have dealt with a lot of companies in Ukraine. You have discussed various deals with owners and management of Ukrainian companies. And you probably have encountered a lot of issues when dealing with these investment proposals. What do you think about that micro-level problems?
Well, I believe that, of course, the transparency is an issue in Ukraine, and unfortunately, still many companies we look at or we talk to, they still don't pay salaries in full. Officially, not of their sales, officially are white, and a lot of tax optimization schemes, so we do have quite low taxes, quite by global standards. So the tax system itself is very complicated. So definitely the companies should do a better job from this perspective. However, I believe what's very important now, the investors will be looking for the growth, right? And of course it will be difficult and they will be investing dollars, euros, foreign currency, right? So it would be hard to investors to sell a local growth story in dollars unless you're like pharma or IT or something like this. So which is more an exception, right, for agriculture. So basically, I would recommend the local companies to focus on expansion to Europe and expanding itself to Europe. And that's actually a good opportunity, because when you look at this, you will understand that from this perspective, the valuation is an opportunity, not such a bad thing. If you manage to grow yourselves to export markets, and primarily Europe, which is much more open market now to Ukraine, because of European Union Association Agreement. I can talk from our experience, when we talk to the companies, they usually say, well, it's hard, it's difficult, they have different standards. there is a lot of competition, they have cheaper sources of financing and so on. So what we basically do, and I personally did with a couple of my companies, I brought one of my companies to Moldova, they still have several investments. And the first half of the day we spent at the glass factory, which is producing basically glass bottles for wine, vodka and so on. And the second day we spent at the winery, at the second largest Moldavian wine holding. And the attitude to Ukrainian company, which went to Moldova, changed significantly after they saw themselves that even not very sophisticated Moldavian companies can actually increase their sales to Europe exponentially. And sometimes they just don't have a choice. Like, for example, the wine market in Russia closed in just one day for a Moldavian company, same as for Georgians, by the way, right, at some point. And then they had no choice but to start selling in Europe. And they used very creative ways, like this wine is prohibited in Russia. They did a lot of promotional campaign based on like support Moldova, go Moldova. And they did it actually quite successfully. At some point ago, Georgians did the same in Ukraine with their wine when it was prohibited in Russia. And now, like, from what I know, the Ukrainian market is the largest market for Georgian wine in the world, probably even larger than Georgian wine market for Georgian wine. So basically there are ways, but you shouldn't give up, you should be trying very hard, but you can achieve this opportunity. So I believe, like, when you're talking about micro perspective and what each of us should do, we should stop complaining, like I hear from many people now, and especially if you read Facebook, somebody here. And should do it something, right? As Kennedy said, that stop, would say, I would believe that stop asking like what Ukraine did for you, right? Think what you can do for Ukraine. And from this perspective, the companies should work harder, become more transparent, sell more here, produce more competitive products. There is another trend which I believe is very positive, that many people from business, people with less education, they go to politics, they go to the government. And I believe this is very encouraging sign, and this trend should continue despite all the difficulties which these people are facing in politics. So if we will be moving in the right direction from this perspective, I believe we have a very good future. And what Mr. Rabinovich said, that there is a lot of room for potential in terms of valuation improvements in Ukrainian companies, that will definitely happen.
Thank you, Konstantin. Yeah, and I wanted to ask another question to Slava. You mentioned about your intent to raise a fund, which will be focused on Ukraine, right? And it will be a mixture, kind of a hybrid between special situations, private equity, and capital market fund, right? What would be the key sectors you would be mostly looking at in case you are successful? And why do you think it's really now a good opportunity to do that?
There is no magic bullet in terms of sectors. I don't want to have any self-imposed criteria or some sort of a specific, specialized fund concentrated in specific industry or in just very few specific industries. Because by design, I don't want any limitations, which contradict my investment philosophy of free markets and efficient valuations of any assets. So therefore, by design, I do not exclude any sectors. Moreover, in my Russian investments, the fund that I managed the last 10 years, it's called Dmytro fund. It is designed such that we don't have to invest into specific stocks only in Russia, but we also can invest into any company domiciled anywhere in the world, as long as it has a significant business focus in Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union. So by that criteria, I actually don't have to launch yet another fund. I can use that Dmytro fund that I already have for my investments in Ukraine. In fact, I do have allocations to Ukraine in that portfolio. The problem is that, as we already mentioned, that the stock market in Ukraine has shrunk and virtually collapsed, and therefore on the portfolio side there's not too much to do. The same probably criteria will apply to the fund in case I'm successful in raising money, where there will be no limitations in sectors, and it just will be a strive to find at that stage assets that are very, very undervalued for a simple philosophy of buying something almost at zero and making many times the money, but remembering that we don't want to fall into the so-called value trap, because some assets can be very, very cheap, and they are cheap for a reason, and they can stay cheap forever, and they can actually become even more cheap. So that's the classic value trap that Russia, for example, has been going through for many years right now, with the horrific performance of the stock market of minus 60% since May 2008, when RTS index peaked out at 2,500. It is now at 1,000. This is 60% in 6 years. And if somebody said to me a year ago that Gazprom is cheap and everything else cheap, that's a classic value trap. It is cheaper by tenths of percent by now, and it can become even more cheap. So Ukraine has this choice to make, and it can become a value trap for any attractive businesses. And investors are not stupid. So either there will be money and the path of clear visibility of not being a value trap, or there will be no money with a value trap.
Thank you. We have approximately 10 minutes left on this panel, and I know that Brian has to leave in a couple of minutes. So I'd like to take some questions from the audience, and once you have a question, could you please state your name and the company name? So, are there any questions?
My name is Unlu. I have a question regarding sectors. I mean, everybody talks about the agricultural sector being such a good sector to invest in. But at the same time, over the last 4 years, at least 4 Ukrainian companies in the agricultural sector who tried to raise money from international investors went bankrupt. Can maybe Brian or somebody else gives an explanation how this works out? Because I think that a lot of investors who already came to the Ukrainian agricultural market lost a lot of money on these investments which are wrong.
I was afraid you were going to ask me that question, Tom. Well, I certainly can't speak specifically about that deal that you're referring to. But naturally, I mean, it's a very difficult sector, one to invest in and manage, because it requires a lot of attention. All investments do, but this one in particular. If somebody wants to deceive, they will deceive. We try to find those investments and those managers and those owners to work with that aren't going to go that route, and they're going to see their investors as partners and develop the business together. That doesn't always work out, unfortunately, and even more unfortunately in this country we see it more often than not. Agriculture will continue to be a popular sector for investment in Ukraine. This is an agricultural country. It does require reform, and I agree with what everybody's been saying, at least in the last 2 panels where I've been participating in this conference, that there's a lot of legal reform that needs to take place in Ukraine. That's 500 days. I think it's even less than that what we have before we start seeing investors give up on this country. I think it's more like 4 to 6 months before we start to see investors say, well, the things aren't progressing, things aren't happening, and they start to look at other markets. I believe, as I've said, that we're starting to see a government be put in place, which is, in my view, out of all the governments that I've seen in Ukraine, and I've only been here for 16, 17 years, but all the governments that I have seen in this country, this government probably has the best potential to do something. And we need to see that happen, and we have a short window of opportunity. I believe that it will happen. I do believe we will see progress made, and it will cover agricultural sector, legal reform. It covers all sectors. We will start to see that. Where I think investment is going to go, and I agree with Slava. If I were running a fund, I wouldn't want to be handcuffed to any particular sector, especially in Ukraine. But as an investment banker, where we're seeing interest, and where we think we will see interest over the next couple of years, is not probably going to be as much in agriculture because of the situations that you've mentioned, Tom. We will start to see investment flow into things like infrastructure. We need to rebuild this country, and infrastructure will be a key area for raising money. I think energy. We all know that Ukraine needs to develop energy independence. We'll start to see money flowing into the energy sector. These are areas that I think we're going to see most of the investment capital flowing over the next 12 to 18 months, hopefully. And again, a lot of it depends on this next 4 to 6 months if we see the progress that we all expect as investors.
Thank you, Brian. Just in terms of time constraints, I think we will be able to take 2 more questions, please. Please state your name and company and to whom you address your question.
When to expect IPO window?
I'm sorry, can you please state your name, company, and to whom you address your question?
CFO Days Group. I want to know when to expect IPO windows for Ukrainian company. It's maybe next week.
To whom do you address this question? Please.
When to expect IPO window for Ukrainian company? Is it possible in next week or next year? Thank you.
Excuse me, your question is clear. I was just trying to ask to whom do you address this question?
Okay, I'll answer the question.
Okay, right.
It's certainly not next week. And it probably won't be next year either. There's a lot that needs to be done here in Ukraine. The first money that's going to come here and already is what we're starting to see is the distressed money, the guys that are looking for the bottom fishers are looking for things that are deeply distressed. The high-risk investors, they're snooping around already, looking for opportunities. Next is going to be private equity. The private equity guys are going to, the longer term, they're going to be looking for assets that they can buy on a value basis and then obviously a growth basis. So they're going to be looking for things to acquire and invest in the country. I don't see an IPO market opening up in Ukraine in the next 12 months for sure.
There are also global issues. Like these in emerging markets, the IPO market is not that very hot. So not only for Ukraine, but
Can we interpret your answer as in 13 months?
Alibaba is an emerging market company.
Yeah,
and it was the largest IPO ever.
Yeah, but I said except for Alibaba, so you didn't hear it. But
yeah, sorry. Yeah. But it was a good except.
It's a government, it's a country. Alibaba is something else. But other than that, for smaller, medium-sized IPOs where our countries produce, like in Turkey, we only had 1 small IPO this year. Looks like next year we'll have again maybe 1 or 2 small IPOs. So in countries like ours, globally there's a problem. Unless you come up with sizable IPOs, there is a market for it, but it doesn't look too bright.
That's the problem with Ukraine. Ukraine. There are not that many companies that are IPO-able in Ukraine, unfortunately. What we called IPOs from 2006 to 2000, I think 11 was the last IPO out of Ukraine. Most of those were not real IPOs. We called them IPOs because, well, I mean, you could argue one way or the other that they were or they weren't, but they weren't real IPOs in the traditional sense. They were addressing an interest and a demand that was coming from portfolio investors who were looking for product to buy in Ukraine. But because they needed to market their investments in their own funds on a daily basis, most of them, they needed to have a market bid and ask that they could show to their back office, say, this is what the value of that investment is in our portfolio. So what we did was we raised money just as we would in a private placement, but then we did a technical listing somewhere, usually Frankfurt or Vienna. These companies didn't have the liquidity that a real IPO would have, and they were never intended to have that kind of liquidity. We were hoping that as they grew as companies, that they would do a real listing in a real market, like in a Poland or a London at some point, but it just never happened. So, we never really had a big IPO market here. There are a handful of companies that have done it, and there are another handful of companies that could do it. But we don't have the sizable assets in Ukraine to have a big IPO market, in my opinion.
There are notes today when actually you asked a question about sectors, and I answered in a more broad way. I think there are two sectors of Ukraine that have an inherent competitive advantage, and these are the stories of failures. The first sector is agricultural sector, and it cannot work without a market, a relatively free but regulated market for agricultural land. Any type of agricultural industry production involves, by definition, a market for agricultural land. In fact, the value of agricultural land takes part in the entire technological and business process, where it can be actually collateralized against loans and so on. It's a part of equity. The second failure, based on the Ukrainian competitive advantage, is something that Estonia and Tallinn in particular took advantage of for themselves, and you can be a direct competitor to them. It is based on a high educational level of programmers and IT engineers. Tallinn has become a huge IT, high-tech hub for the entire former Soviet Union bloc. In fact, with the current government crackdown in Russia and all the shocking events that are happening inside Russia, a huge number of companies are shifting their hardware to Tallinn and go to the cloud, with Tallinn being a hub for their IT operations. Why is it not happening in Kyiv? I hope it will, but that would be yet another source, perhaps, for small to medium-sized businesses that might become larger and can be successful in the pipeline for next stages, including IPOs. But these are two failures that really upset me, and they should upset you.
Just to add to Brian, unless the IPOs you make are really successful IPOs, which is basically part of it is picked up by foreign institutional investor, and part of it is picked up by local individuals, institutional investors, and there is liquidity. There isn't too much in the IPO market. What we did in Turkey was, like 2 years ago, we started this IPO campaign. So promoted companies to go public, together with the Capital Market Board, Istanbul Stock Exchange, and I was the chairman of the Capital Market Association. So we pushed IPOs. And it turned out to be a big scandal, because they were all medium-sized IPOs, maybe the 10 million to 50 million, 60 million, only sold to locals without any institutional buyers buying these issues, and the result was disastrous. So sometimes it's better for the IPO market not to open, not to start, unless it starts in a healthy way.
Thank you. I think we have time only for one final question from the audience. If there is one. Okay, it's exactly 6 p.m., so I think I'd like to thank you for the questions, and I'd like to thank the panelists. Very interesting discussion, and to pass the microphone to Anufriev, the president of the CFA Society in Ukraine, for final word.
Yes, I will be really short. I would like to announce you that we were trying to keep this conference today as optimistic as possible. And I would like to tell you that the CFA Institute, they believe in Ukraine, and next year CFA Society Ukraine will be hosting the Central and Eastern European Conference of the CFA Institute. So I would like to kindly ask you to mark your calendar the same day, see you same day, same time, probably the same place. Now,